The Arizona sun didn't just shine, it punished. It beat down on the red rocks until the whole world shimmered with heat, a furnace that baked the very soul. Clara Ara felt it on her neck, a searing brand, as she moved through the mesquite trees. Her leather boots made no sound on the sandy earth. She was a ghost in this unforgiving land. 15 miles behind her was Tombstone, a town of dust and noise and men with hard eyes. But out here in the year 1885 was a different world, a forbidden world. Her father, Colonel Patterson, a man carved from the same rock as the mountains around them, had told her never to come this far. This was Apache land. His words were not a suggestion, they were a command. But Clara Ara, with her light brown curls and eyes the color of new spring grass, had a spirit that chafed under orders. At 21, she was tired of being the cavalry officer's daughter, a porcelain doll to be kept safe on a shelf. She was drawn to the wild, to the danger, to the whispers of a world her father was trying to destroy. A sound pulled her forward, the sound of running water, a miracle in this parched landscape. She'd found this hidden stream weeks ago, a secret sanctuary where she could breathe. But today was different. The air was heavy, silent. The birds had stopped singing. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to turn back, to run to the false safety of the fort. But something stronger, something she couldn't name, pulled her on. She crept toward a massive boulder, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She peered through a tangle of ironwood branches, and the world stopped. There in a pool of crystal clear water stood a man. But he wasn't just a man. He was a piece of the landscape itself, forged from the sun and the stone. His skin was the color of rich copper, gleaming in the dappled light. Muscles moved under his skin with a fluid power that spoke of countless battles, a body honed into a perfect weapon. He was tall, impossibly so, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of a nation. Long, raven-black hair fell around them, adorned with eagle feathers that danced in the slight breeze. This was no ordinary warrior. Every settler, every soldier, knew the name whispered in fear around campfires. Dakota, the war chief whose name was a death knell. Clara Ara knew she should run. Everything she had ever been taught told her this man was a savage, a ruthless killer. The stories they told in Tombstone were of blood and fire, of women and children shown no mercy. But as she watched, frozen behind the rock, she saw none of that. She saw a man moving with a grace that was almost holy. He cupped water in his hands, letting it run over his face, not as a man washing away dirt, but as a priest performing a sacred rite. His eyes, dark and deep, scanned the canopy of leaves above, and in them she saw a profound sadness, a weariness that seemed older than the mountains themselves. He was magnificent, utterly, terrifyingly magnificent. The men she knew, the pale, suited men from back east, the uniformed soldiers who followed her father's orders, they spoke of conquering this land. Dakota looked like he belonged to it, like a river or a storm, an elemental force that could not be tamed. He submerged himself, then rose from the water, droplets clinging to his hair like diamonds. His lips moved, a silent prayer to gods she could never understand. She was an intruder, a spy in this sacred moment, but she couldn't look away. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. And then he stopped. His entire body went rigid. It was as if he'd heard her thoughts, felt her eyes on his skin. Slowly, with a deliberateness that turned her blood to ice, his head turned. His dark eyes, sharp as a hawk's, locked onto her hiding place. He saw her. There was no doubt. For a long, silent moment that stretched into an eternity, the world held its breath. Clara Ara felt stripped bare, her soul laid open by his gaze. She was caught, a cavalry officer's daughter, spying on the most feared Apache in the territory. His expression was a mask, impossible to read, but his eyes held hers, a silent challenge, a question she couldn't answer. Then with that same terrifying slowness, he began to move. He waded toward the bank, where a rifle and a long, ornate knife lay resting against a rock. The spell was broken. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Clara. She scrambled backward, thorns tearing at her dress, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. She had to get to her horse. She had to get away. She turned to flee, a sob catching in her throat. But the sound that came wasn't a war cry. It wasn't the thunder of pursuit. It was a single word spoken in perfect, accented English, a voice as deep and resonant as distant thunder. Wait! The command was not loud, but it carried an authority that rooted her to the spot. Against all reason, against every instinct for survival, she stopped. She turned back, her eyes wide with a fear that was slowly being replaced by a bewildering curiosity. Dakota stood on the bank, water dripping from his body onto the hot stones. He hadn't touched his weapons. He was just standing there watching her, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. "You have been watching," he said. It wasn't a question. Clara Ara's mouth was as dry as the desert floor. Words failed her. How could she explain that she wasn't a spy, but a lost soul drawn to his power, to his peace? I didn't mean to," she stammered, the words a pathetic whisper. He studied her, and for the first time, she saw something shift in his stone-like expression. A flicker of surprise. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice a little softer now, but still holding that core of command. "Clara Ara," she breathed, shocked that she had answered. He repeated her name, tasting the syllables, making it sound like a piece of music she'd never heard before. "I am Dakota," he said, "war chief of the Chiricahua." And in that moment, under the blazing Arizona sun, two worlds collided with the force of a thunderclap, and nothing would ever be the same again. The silence that fell between them was a living thing, stretched taut with 1,000 unspoken words. Clara Ara's mind reeled. This man, this legend whispered about in terrified tones, was standing before her, speaking to her, not as a captive, but as an equal? Dakota reached for a buckskin shirt, pulling it over his head. The movement was slow, deliberate, giving her time to think, to breathe. But it did little to hide the raw power of his presence. Even half-clothed, he seemed to command the very air around them. "You should not be here," he said. And it wasn't a threat, but a simple, undeniable fact. These lands are not safe for a white woman alone. Clara Ara found her courage, a small, flickering flame in the storm of her fear. "I know the risks. I come here to gather herbs." It was a weak excuse, and they both knew it. She gestured vaguely at the stream. "I never expected to find anyone." A ghost of a smile touched Dakota's lips, though it never reached his eyes. "You did not expect to find an Apache in Apache territory?" The quiet irony in his voice made heat rise in her cheeks. Her father's warnings, which she dismissed as overprotective, now sounded like stark, life-or-death wisdom. Trying to regain some composure, she changed the subject. "You speak English so well." The moment the words left her mouth, she wanted to snatch them back. They sounded foolish, condescending. But Dakota simply nodded, settling onto a large boulder, the movement creating a small, crucial distance between them. "I learned from missionaries," he explained, his gaze distant. "Before I learned their God was a cage for my people, I kept the language. Knowledge is a weapon, even when it comes from an enemy." There was a profound bitterness in his voice, a hint of old wounds. It drew Clara in, making her take a hesitant step closer. "The people in town, they say terrible things about you. They call you a monster." Dakota's dark eyes snapped back to hers, sharp and penetrating. "And what do you think, Clara Ara? Now that you have seen the monster in his den, what do you see?" The question was a challenge, a test. She looked at him, truly looked past the legend. She saw the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the immense weight of leadership on his shoulders. She saw a man ready for war, but not hungry for it. "I see a man," she answered, her voice soft but sure. "I see someone who loves this land. I see someone who is tired of fighting." A flicker of surprise, of genuine shock, crossed Dakota's face. He was silent for a long moment, studying her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. "My people call me Dakota. It means friend to all, a name from my childhood, before the war. Now it is a bitter joke," his hands resting on his knees, clenched into fists. "My warriors say I am weak because I seek an end to this bloodshed. Your soldiers see only a savage to be hunted. There is no middle ground in this war, Clara. No place for peace." The way he said her name sent a shiver down her spine. It was a caress and a warning, all at once. "Maybe that's why we're both here," she said, the word surprising her. "Looking for a place that doesn't exist in our worlds." The sun was starting to dip below the canyon rim, casting long, dramatic shadows. She knew she had to leave. If she wasn't back by nightfall, her father would send a patrol. And the thought of armed soldiers finding this place, finding him, filled her with a new kind of dread. "I have to go," she said, her voice tight. Dakota rose to his feet, a towering silhouette against the dying light. "This meeting," he said, his voice low and serious, "it must remain a secret, for your safety and for mine." He held her gaze, and she felt the terrifying weight of his words. "If my people knew I spoke peacefully with the daughter of Colonel Patterson, they would call me a traitor. Some would call for my death." Clara Ara swallowed hard. "And if my father knew I was here with you, he would lock me away and throw away the key. Or worse." They stood there, two enemies bound by a secret that could destroy them both. A secret that had, in the space of an hour, become the most important thing in her life. She turned to leave, her heart a confusing mix of terror and an exhilarating, dangerous hope. "Clara Ara." His voice stopped her again. She looked back. His face was unreadable in the twilight, but his question was clear, sharp, and more dangerous than any knife. "Will you come back?" Every sensible part of her brain screamed no. To return would be madness. It was a path that led only to ruin. "Yes," she whispered, the word of betrayal to her people, to her father, to everything she had ever known. A single, almost imperceptible nod from Dakota was his only reply. But in the gathering dark, she thought she saw a glimmer of something in his eyes. Not triumph, but relief. As she rode back towards Tombstone, the cool desert air doing nothing to calm the fire in her blood, she knew her life had been split in two. There was the life before she saw him, and the life that was just beginning. She had stepped off a cliff, and she had no idea how far she was about to fall. The secret meetings became her lifeblood. For 3 weeks, Clara Ara lived a double life. By day, she was the dutiful daughter, arranging flowers and enduring stuffy dinners at the fort. But every afternoon, she would saddle her horse, the lie of gathering herbs tasting like ash in her mouth, and ride to their hidden stream. She rode not just with hope, but with a growing sense of dread. Their sanctuary felt less like a haven and more like the calm eye of a hurricane. The world outside their canyon was spiraling toward war, and she could feel the storm drawing closer. With each meeting, the cautious respect between them deepened into something more, something terrifying and beautiful. She saw the leader in him, the man who carried the future of his people on his shoulders. He saw the fire in her, the spirit that refused to be caged. They were two sides of the same coin, forged in the same unforgiving landscape, but they were not alone in the desert. One afternoon, as she was preparing to leave the fort, a shadow fell over her. "More herbs, Miss Patterson." The voice was smooth, but with an edge of steel. Lieutenant Davis. He was her father's right-hand man, ambitious, handsome, and utterly ruthless. He had made his interest in Clara Ara clear, and she had made her lack of interest just as plain. Davis's eyes, the color of a pale winter sky, held a possessive glint she found unnerving. "You spend a great deal of time in the wilderness," he continued, his smile not reaching his eyes. "A dangerous habit. You never know what you might find out there." It was a warning, a subtle, chilling threat. He knew something, or he suspected. A cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. That day, her ride to the stream was frantic. She felt watched, hunted. The familiar path seemed menacing, every shadow a potential threat. When she reached the clearing, Dakota was not there. Panic seized her. Had he been captured? Had Davis set a trap? She waited, her heart pounding, for what felt like an eternity. Just as she was about to give up hope, he emerged from the trees, silent as a mountain cat. But he was different. The peace she had come to cherish in him was gone, replaced by the grim readiness of a warrior. "We cannot meet here anymore," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Your soldiers are pushing deeper. They are scouting this area." Before Clara Ara could respond, he held up a hand. his head cocked, listening to something she couldn't hear. "Someone is coming," he hissed. "Now!" He grabbed her arm, his touch firm but not rough, and pulled her behind the massive boulder where she had first hidden. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Peering through a tiny crevice, she saw them. Two cavalry scouts, their blue uniforms a jarring stain against the natural beauty of the canyon. And leading them, with a confident smirk on his face, was Lieutenant Davis. He had followed her. This was no random patrol. It was a trap, and she had led them right to it. Davis dismounted, his eyes scanning the clearing. "She comes here," he said to his men, his voice carrying in the still air. "I've tracked her for days. Find her. She's likely with one of them." One of them. The word was a venomous spit. He wanted to catch her, to prove her a traitor, to have her for himself. It was a power play, and she and Dakota were the pawns. Dakota's hand tightened on her arm. She could feel the coiled tension in his body, the barely restrained violence. He was a cornered wolf, and she was trapped with him. "When I move, you run," he whispered, his breath warm against her ear. "Run and do not look back." "No," she whispered back fiercely. "I won't leave you." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw a flash of surprise and something else. Something that looked like admiration. But there was no time. One of the scouts spotted the tracks near the stream's edge. Tracks Dakota had not had time to conceal. "Over here, Lieutenant. Fresh tracks, moccasins, and a lady's boot." Davis's face twisted into a triumphant sneer. "Spread out. He can't be far. I want him alive. Her too." The soldiers fanned out, their rifles at the ready. They were closing in. This was it. The end of their secret world. The end of everything. And then everything happened at once. Dakota moved. He wasn't a man anymore, but a blur of motion, a force of nature unleashed. He erupted from behind the boulder, a stone tomahawk appearing in his hand as if from thin air. He didn't make a sound, but his sudden appearance caused one of the soldiers to cry out in shock. The soldier raised his rifle, but Dakota was too fast. He closed the distance in two silent strides, a single precise strike knocking the weapon from the man's hands. He shoved the disarmed soldier hard, sending him stumbling back into his companion. "Run, Clara!" Dakota's voice was a roar, the voice of the war chief she had only heard stories about. This time she obeyed. She scrambled from their hiding place and sprinted toward the path, towards her horse, her lungs burning. A shot rang out, the bullet whining past her ear, so close she felt its heat. She didn't dare look back. She could hear the sounds of the fight, the grunts of effort, the thud of blows, but no more gunshots. She reached her horse, her hands fumbling with the reins. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Dakota was a whirlwind of controlled fury, disarming the second soldier with a fluid, brutal grace. But Davis was there. The lieutenant had drawn his revolver and was taking careful aim, not at the fighting Apache, but at Clara. His face was a mask of cold rage. He wasn't trying to rescue her. He was trying to kill her. He couldn't let her live to tell her side of the story. Dakota saw it. In the middle of his fight, his eyes were still on her. With a guttural cry, he threw his tomahawk. It spun end over end, a blur of wood and stone, and struck the revolver in Davis's hand. The gun flew from his grasp, clattering against the rocks. Davis howled in pain and fury, clutching his shattered hand. That single moment was all Dakota needed. He vaulted onto the back of one of the scouts' horses, a powerful, seamless motion. He galloped towards Clara, leaning down to grab her, pulling her onto the horse in front of him without slowing down. They thundered out of the canyon, leaving the two disarmed soldiers and a wounded, enraged Lieutenant Davis behind them. The wind whipped at Clara's hair, the powerful body of the warhorse beneath her, Dakota's strong arm around her waist, the only thing keeping her from falling. They were fugitives now. There was no going back. She hadn't just been discovered. She had been rescued by the enemy, and the man who was supposed to protect her had tried to put a bullet in her back. The trap had been sprung, but not in the way Davis had intended. He wanted to capture a traitor. Instead, he had created an enemy, and he had just shown Clara that the true savages didn't always wear buckskin. They rode hard, the stolen cavalry horse eating up the miles, pushing deeper into the jagged, sun-blasted heart of Apache territory. Clara Ara clung to Dakota, the rhythm of the horse's gallop a frantic heartbeat against her own. The canyon, their sanctuary, was now a crime scene, a place where her old life had been violently murdered. There was no explanation she could give, no story she could tell that would not condemn her. In the eyes of her father, in the eyes of the entire world she had known, she was now a willing captive at best, a traitor at worst. Dakota finally slowed the horse to a walk as they entered a narrow winding canyon, its high walls providing cover from any pursuit. He brought the horse to a stop in a hidden alcove where a small spring trickled from the rock. He slid from the horse's back, then reached up to help her down. Her legs were weak, trembling, and she nearly collapsed. He steadied her, his hands on her arms. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern, his eyes scanning her for any sign of injury. She shook her head, unable to speak. The image of Davis's face, cold and murderous as he aimed his pistol, was burned into her mind. "He tried to kill me," she whispered, the realization hitting her with the force of a physical blow. "Davis, he tried to kill me." Dakota's face hardened, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out like cords. "He could not risk you telling your father the truth," he said, his voice a low growl. "That he followed you, that he set a trap not to rescue you, but to start a war he could be a hero in." The cold, brutal logic of it settled in Clara's stomach like a stone. Davis didn't care about her. He cared about glory. A dead daughter, supposedly killed by savages during a heroic rescue attempt, was far more useful to his career than a live one who could expose his lies. This changed everything. This wasn't just about a forbidden love anymore. It was about a conspiracy, a lie that was being used to push two peoples into a massacre. "My father," Clara Ara said, her voice gaining strength, turning hard with a new cold anger. "He has to be told. He has to know what Davis is." Dakota looked at her, his expression grim. "And who will he believe, Clara Ara? A decorated officer who returns with a wounded hand and a story of a savage ambush? Or his daughter who ran away with the Apache war chief who supposedly captured her?" He was right. The truth was a casualty, left bleeding back in the canyon. Davis would twist the story. He would paint Dakota as a monster, and her as a deluded, brainwashed captive. Her father, a man of duty and order, would believe his officer. He would see only betrayal. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice laced with desperation. "We can't just hide. Davis is going to use this. He's going to push my father to attack. The big campaign, it will happen now. He'll make sure of it." "Yes," Dakota agreed, his gaze turning toward the horizon, as if he could already see the columns of cavalry advancing. "He has what he needs. An excuse." He walked to the spring, splashing water on his face. He was thinking, planning. She could see the weight of his responsibility settling back onto his shoulders. He was no longer just the man she met in secret. He was the war chief, with hundreds of lives depending on his next move. He turned back to her, a decision made. "There is a place, a hidden camp, deep in the Dragoon Mountains. My people are there. You will be safe." "And you?" she asked, her heart clenching with a new fear. "I must warn the other bands. Not all will listen to me. Some, led by a warrior named Kale, believe I am weak. They listen to whispers of war, not talk of peace. This news, it will strengthen Kale's position. He will say I brought this trouble upon us by speaking with you." The situation was worse than she had imagined. She wasn't just a fugitive from her own people. She was a liability to his. Her presence could shatter the fragile unity of the Apache, sparking a civil war just as the cavalry was preparing to strike. "So I am a danger to you here too," she said, the words tasting like poison. "They will see me as the enemy." "Some will," Dakota admitted, his honesty a cold comfort. "But they will answer to me. I will take you there myself. Then I must ride to meet with the elders." He looked at her, and for a moment the war chief vanished, and she saw only the man. "Clara Ara, this path is not one I would have chosen for you. It will be hard. You will lose everything you have known." "I already have," she said quietly, meeting his gaze. "The girl who rode out of Tombstone this morning is gone. The only thing I have left is the truth. And you." The admission hung in the air between them, a fragile, powerful thing in a world of violence and lies. He took a step closer, reaching out to gently touch a stray curl that had fallen across her face. "Then we will face this together," he said softly. But as they prepared to ride again, deeper into the wilderness that was now her only home, a new and terrible thought took root in Clara Ara's mind. Davis was ambitious and cunning. Tracking her to the stream was a bold move. But was he working alone? Or was he part of something bigger? The speed of her father's campaign, the sudden reinforcements, the aggressive patrols, it all felt orchestrated. What if Davis wasn't just an ambitious lieutenant? What if he was a pawn in a much larger, more sinister game, one designed to ensure that peace was never an option? The desert ahead was vast and dangerous, but Clara realized the true wilderness they had to navigate was one of deceit and betrayal, and the enemies they faced might not be the ones they expected. The journey to the hidden camp was a blur of rock and sky. They rode for a day and a night, stopping only for brief rests. Dakota moved with a relentless, focused energy, his knowledge of the terrain absolute. He chose paths that seemed impassable, trails that were little more than goat tracks, always climbing, always moving deeper into the mountain stronghold. For Clara, it was an ordeal. Her body ached, her fine dress was in tatters, and her mind was a whirlwind of fear and grief. But with every mile, a strange transformation was taking place. The soft edges of the officer's daughter were being stripped away, burned off by the harsh sun and the stark reality of her situation. She was learning to be silent, to watch, to endure. The Apache camp was nestled in a high hidden valley, a place of impossible beauty. Tents made of hide and canvas were scattered amongst ancient oak trees, a clear stream running through the center. But the beauty was marred by an undercurrent of tension. As they rode into the camp, a hush fell. Faces turned to watch them, eyes filled with suspicion, hostility, and a stark, fearful curiosity. They saw their war chief, and with him, a white woman, the enemy. A group of warriors, their faces grim, approached them. At their head was a man with a cruel slash of a mouth and eyes that burned with a cold fire. "Kyle," Dakota said, his voice low. Dakota dismounted and stood before them, placing himself between Clara and the hostile warriors. "She is with me," he announced, his voice ringing with authority. "She is under my protection." Kyle sneered, his eyes raking over Clara with contempt. "You bring a white eye into our stronghold, Dakota? Have you gone mad? Her soldiers hunt us, and you bring one of them to our hearth." "She brings a warning," Dakota countered, his voice like flint. "The soldier attack is imminent. They were led to me by a traitor among them who seeks to start a war." She saw the betrayal with her own eyes. "Or she is the traitor," Kale shot back, his voice rising. "A spy, sent to learn our location. Perhaps this is your piece, Dakota, to lead them right to our families." A murmur of agreement went through the assembled warriors. Clara felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her, condemning her. She had never felt so alone. "Enough!" Dakota's voice cut through the rising tension like a whip. "I am chief here. My word is law. She will be treated as my guest. Anyone who harms her will answer to me." He stared down Kyle, a silent battle of wills passing between the two men. Kyle, for all his blustering, was not yet ready for a direct challenge. He spat on the ground, but he backed down, his warriors reluctantly following suit. The immediate crisis was over, but the threat remained, hanging in the air like poison. Dakota led her to a small, isolated lodge near the edge of the camp. "You will stay here," he said. "Do not leave. Not everyone here shares my trust in you." He left her with a water skin and some dried meat, his face etched with worry. "I must speak with the Council of Elders," he explained. "I have to make them understand. I have to convince them to move, to prepare." As he turned to leave, Clara grabbed his arm. "Dakota, they will not listen to you because of me. I am making you weak in their eyes. Maybe I should leave." He turned back, his hands cupping her face, his gaze intense. "If you leave, you will die. And if you die, the truth dies with you. No, Clara, you are here for a reason. There is a purpose to this that we do not yet see. You must be patient. You must be strong." He left, and Clara Ara was alone with her fear in the hostile silence of the camp. The next few days were a special kind of hell. She was a ghost, shunned and watched. Women would turn their backs when she approached the stream. Children would fall silent and run away. Only an old woman, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of 1,000 years, would sometimes leave a bowl of food near her lodge, a silent act of kindness in a sea of hostility. One evening, as she sat inside her lodge, she overheard voices just outside. It was Kyle and his followers. "He is blinded by her." Kyle's voice was a venomous whisper. "He risks all our lives for a white-skinned witch." The council is divided. They listen to his old talk of peace even now. But when the soldiers come, they will see the truth. They will see that my path, the path of the warrior, is the only way. Another voice, younger, more hesitant, spoke. "But what if he is right? What if she does carry a warning?" "She carries death," Kyle hissed. "And I have proof. A scout I sent to watch the soldiers brought me this." Clara Ara crept to the flap of her lodge, her heart frozen. She peered through a tiny slit. Kyle was holding something up in the firelight. It was a piece of paper, a telegram. "It was dropped by a cavalry messenger our scout intercepted," Kyle explained with satisfaction. "It is from this Lieutenant Davis to Colonel Patterson. It says the captive has given away the location of our main stronghold in the Dragoon Mountains. It calls for an immediate, full-scale assault." A wave of nausea washed over Clara. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. Davis was not only twisting the story of the ambush, he was inventing new betrayals, putting her name to them, using her as the justification for the massacre he so desperately wanted. But Cale and his men would believe it. It was the proof they needed that she was a spy, that Dakota was a fool. This telegram would destroy Dakota's authority. It would give Cale the power he craved, and it would sentence them all to death. She had to warn Dakota. But as she moved to leave the lodge, a shadow fell across the entrance. A large warrior, one of Cale's men, stood there, a knife in his hand, a grim smile on his face. She was a prisoner, and the fuse had just been lit. Trapped. The warrior at the entrance of her lodge was a silent, menacing statue. He didn't speak. He didn't move. But his message was clear. She was Cale's prisoner, her word against a forged telegram from her own people. It was hopeless. Panic gave way to a cold, hard resolve. She would not be a pawn in Cale's power game. She had to get to Dakota. She had to expose the lie before it tore his people apart and brought the cavalry crashing down on them. She searched the small lodge, her hands trembling. There was nothing. No weapon, no tool, nothing but a sleeping pallet and a water skin. The back of the lodge was made of stretched hides, lashed to the wooden frame with leather cords. It was her only chance. Working in frantic silence, her fingers raw and clumsy, she began to pick at the knots. They were tight, meant to withstand wind and rain. Not a desperate prisoner. It felt like hours. Every sound from outside the lodge making her freeze. Finally, one knot came loose. Then another. She created a small opening, barely large enough to squeeze through. Taking a deep breath, she slipped out into the cold night air. The back of the lodge was shadowed, away from the main campfires. She pressed herself against the hide wall, her heart pounding so hard she was sure the guard must hear it. She had to find Dakota. He would be at the council fire, trying to reason with the elders, unaware of the serpent's egg Kale was about to hatch. She moved through the shadows, a ghost in a hostile camp. She flitted from lodge to lodge, using every patch of darkness as cover. The layout of the camp, which she had mournfully observed during her days of isolation, was now burned into her memory. She was close. She could hear the low murmur of voices from the large council lodge ahead. But she could also hear another sound, the sound of running feet. Kyle was making his move. She saw them, a dark cluster of figures moving towards the council lodge. Kyle was in the lead, the telegram held aloft like a sacred text. There was no more time for stealth. Clara Ara broke from the shadows and ran, her tattered dress catching on rocks and shrubs. "Dakota!" she screamed, her voice raw. Heads turned. The camp, which had been settling into a nervous sleep, erupted. She saw Dakota emerge from the council lodge, his face a mask of confusion and alarm. She saw Kyle and his warriors stop, shocked by her sudden appearance. "It's a lie!" she cried, stumbling as she ran toward the council fire. "Kyle has a telegram. It's a forgery from Davis. He's trying to turn you against Dakota." Kyle recovered from his shock, his face twisting into a mask of fury. "Seize the witch!" he roared. His warriors surged forward. But Dakota was faster. He met her halfway, pulling her behind him, shielding her with his body as he drew the long knife from his belt. The firelight glinted on the steel. "You will not touch her," Dakota said, his voice dangerously quiet. He faced Kyle and the dozen warriors backing him, a lone wolf holding his ground. "You dare to interrupt a council of elders with this madness?" Kyle held up the telegram. "This is not madness. It is the truth you refuse to see. The white woman is a spy. This proves it. She has betrayed us all. She has led her father right to us." He read the contents of the telegram aloud, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. A wave of fear and anger rippled through the crowd of people who had gathered. They looked at Clara, then at Dakota, their faces filled with doubt and accusation. "It's a lie," Clara insisted, her voice shaking but firm, from behind Dakota's protective form. "Davis tried to kill me. He is the traitor. He wants this war." "And why should we believe you?" Kyle sneered. "Your skin is white. Your father is the soldier chief. You are the enemy." The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Dakota's authority was crumbling. The people were afraid, and Cal was feeding that fear. One wrong move, and the camp would erupt into bloody civil war. Then the old woman, the one who had shown Clara kindness, stepped forward. Her name was Keone, and she was the widow of the previous chief. Her voice, though frail, carried an immense authority. "I will look into the heart of the white woman," she said, quieting the crowd. "The spirits do not lie." She approached Clara, her ancient eyes, dark and piercing, searching Clara's face. She placed a wrinkled hand on Clara's cheek. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. "Tell me your story," she commanded. With the entire camp watching, with Dakota's life and the fate of his people hanging in the balance, Clara spoke. She told them everything. About the secret meetings, about her growing love for Dakota, about her belief in peace. She told them about Davis, his ambition, his trap in the canyon, the cold look in his eyes as he aimed his pistol at her. Her voice didn't waver. She spoke the truth, a simple, desperate truth. When she finished, there was a profound silence. Keone's hand was still on her cheek. The old woman closed her eyes for a long moment, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then she opened them and turned to face the people. "Her heart is true," Keone announced, her voice ringing with conviction. "She does not lie. The enemy is not this woman. The enemy is the one who wrote those words of deceit." She pointed a trembling finger at the telegram in Cal's hand. Cal was stunned. He had counted on Keone's loyalty to tradition, her suspicion of outsiders. He had lost. The mood of the crowd began to shift. They looked at Kyle now with suspicion. If the telegram was a lie, then he had used it to try and seize power. He was the traitor. "She has bewitched you all," Kyle roared in desperation, but his power was broken. Dakota stepped forward. "You have brought division to our people in a time of war, Kale. You have challenged my leadership with lies. You will be exiled. Leave this camp by sunrise and never return." Kyle, his face a mask of pure hatred, looked from Dakota to Clara. "This is not over," he snarled, before turning and stalking away into the darkness, his few remaining loyalists slinking after him. The immediate danger had passed, but as the camp settled into a tense quiet, a new, more horrifying realization dawned on Clara. The telegram was a forgery, yes, a lie designed by Davis to justify an attack. But what if the information in it wasn't a lie? What if Davis, through some other means, actually knew the location of their camp? The telegram wasn't just a justification. It was a warning. Suddenly, a cry came from the darkness. A lone rider, an Apache scout, was galloping into camp, his horse lathered and bleeding. "Soldiers!" the scout screamed, his voice choked with panic. "Hundreds of them! They are in the mountains. They are closing in from the north. They know where we are." The telegram hadn't been a lie to start a war. The war had already started. The telegram was a final, cruel piece of psychological warfare from Davis. He had sent it knowing it would arrive just as his troops were closing the net. He wanted to sow chaos and division just before he wiped them all out. And he had nearly succeeded. There was no time for relief, no time for victory. There was only the cold, hard fact. The U.S. cavalry was on their doorstep. And Clara Ara, the woman who had tried to bring peace, was now trapped in the heart of the fortress her own father was about to destroy. The time for talking was over. The battle for survival had begun. Pandemonium. The scouts' warning shattered the camp's fragile calm. People ran in every direction, grabbing children, weapons, and whatever meager possessions they could carry. The time for debate was gone, replaced by the stark, brutal instinct for survival. Dakota was no longer a leader trying to persuade. He was a commander in a war that had just arrived at his doorstep. "To the high passes!" he roared, his voice cutting through the panic. "We cannot fight them here. We run!" He grabbed Clara Ara's arm, pulling her through the chaos towards a pen of horses. "You will ride with me," he commanded. The plan was desperate. Flee deeper into the Dragoon Mountains, a maze of canyons and ridges where a small mobile group might evade a larger, slower army. But Clara Ara knew her father. Colonel Patterson was a methodical, relentless man, and he had Lieutenant Davis whispering in his ear, feeding him lies, pushing him onward. They weren't just being pursued, they were being herded. As they rode out of the valley, a train of terrified families behind them, the first shots echoed from the canyon walls. The cavalry was already at the entrance to the valley, faster than anyone had thought possible. Rifle fire erupted from the ridges above. Davis hadn't just brought the main force to the front door. He had sent flanking parties to seal the trap. They were surrounded. "This way!" Dakota yelled, veering off the main trail and leading a smaller group of warriors and Clara up a steep, treacherous rockfall. It was their only chance, a path too narrow and dangerous for the main body of soldiers. The non-combatants, the women, children, and elders, would have to trust another warrior to lead them on the lower path, hoping to break through the cavalry line where it was weakest. It was a brutal choice, splitting his forces, leaving his people, but it was the only choice he had. They climbed, the horses slipping and scrambling on the loose rock. Bullets whined around them, chipping stone from the cliffs. Below, the valley they had just abandoned became a scene from hell. The blue-coated soldiers swarmed in, firing at the fleeing families. Clara Ara's stomach turned. These were her people, slaughtering Dakota's people, all because of one man's lies. Her father was down there, leading them. The thought was a knife in her gut. They reached a high ridge, offering a temporary respite and a horrifying view of the battle below. Dakota paused, his face a grim mask of anguish as he watched the unfolding massacre. He had failed to protect them. His desire for peace had made him slow to act, and now his people were paying the price. "This is my fault," he said, his voice thick with self-loathing. "No," Clara said, grabbing his arm, forcing him to look at her. Her voice was fierce, filled with a fire she didn't know she possessed. "This is Davis's fault, and we are going to make him pay." In that moment, something shifted between them. She was no longer a frightened refugee. He was no longer just her protector. They were partners in a desperate fight for the truth. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady. He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He saw not the officer's daughter, but a warrior in her own right. "There is an old trail," he said, pointing towards an even more forbidding series of peaks. "It will take us west around the main soldier force. We can try to circle back, strike at their supply lines, cause chaos. We can't win a direct fight, but we can bleed them." But Clara Ara was shaking her head. "No, that's a warrior's plan. It's not enough. We don't need to bleed them. We need to stop them. We need to get to my father." Dakota stared at her as if she were insane. "He is leading the attack. He will shoot you on sight." "He is my father," she shot back. "He is an honorable man being manipulated by a liar. If he knew the truth, if he could see the proof of Davis's betrayal, he would stop this. I know he would." The new plan was madness. To win this war, they had to stop fighting it. They had to get through the battle lines, find the enemy commander, and convince him he was wrong, all while being hunted by both sides. A new terrible thought struck her. Kyle, the exiled warrior, was out there somewhere, his heart filled with hatred for them both. He wouldn't have gone far. He would be watching, waiting for his moment. They weren't just caught between the Apache and the cavalry. It was a three-way war. How do we prove it? Dakota asked, the practicality of the warrior cutting through the desperation. Your word against his? The telegram, Clara said, her mind racing. Kale still has it. If we can get it, it proves Davis sent a message with false information. And there has to be more. Davis couldn't have done this alone. He would have needed help, someone on the inside of the Apache who was feeding him information. The horrifying realization dawned on both of them at the same time. Kyle. It all clicked into place. How did Davis know the location of the hidden camp? How did the cavalry move so fast? Davis hadn't found the camp. He had been told where it was. Kyle, in his lust for power, had betrayed his own people. He had conspired with Davis, feeding him information in exchange for a promise that when Dakota was dead, Kyle would be made the new chief of the reservation, a puppet leader for the army. The telegram wasn't just a forgery, it was a signal between conspirators. Their mission became terrifyingly clear. They had to find Kyle. They had to get that telegram and force him to confess. And then, with that proof, they had to somehow get to Colonel Patterson in the heart of his command before he wiped out the rest of the Chiricahua. It was impossible, a suicide mission, but it was the only way. As they turned their horses towards the west, not to flee but to hunt, they were no longer just running for their lives. They were hunting the truth. And in the bloody chaos of the Dragoon Mountains, the truth was the only weapon they had left. The hunt for Kale was a desperate race against time. The sounds of battle faded behind them as they plunged into the labyrinthine canyons, Dakota tracking his rival with an instinct that bordered on supernatural. He found the trail of Kyle and his handful of followers, a trail they made little effort to conceal. Kyle wasn't running. He was heading somewhere specific. He's not just hiding, Dakota said, studying the tracks. He's going to a meeting. The realization was a bolt of lightning. Davis and Kale. They had a rendezvous point, a place to confirm the success of their treachery. Where? Clara asked, her voice tense. There is a place, Dakota said, his voice grim. An old Spanish silver mine, abandoned for 100 years. It is neutral ground, a place for secrets. They pushed their horses harder, the setting sun painting the sky in bloody shades of orange and crimson. They found the mine carved into the side of a desolate mesa, a dark scar on the landscape. 2 horses were tied near the entrance. They were here. Dismounting, they crept toward the entrance, moving like shadows in the twilight. Voices drifted from within, echoing off the stone walls. Davis's smooth, arrogant tone and Cal's guttural rasp. And when Patterson has finished wiping out the last of them, he'll be a hero, Davis was saying, and I'll be the one who negotiated the peace with you, the new leader of the Apache. A promotion for me, a chiefdom for you. You promised me Dakota's head, Kale snarled. He escaped the valley. My men saw him ride into the high country with the White Witch. A minor inconvenience, Davis said dismissively. They're trapped in these mountains with 1,000 soldiers hunting them. They'll be dead by morning. Now the rifles I promised you, half now, half when the job is finished. Rifles. The betrayal was deeper than they had imagined. Davis wasn't just using Kale for information. He was arming a renegade faction, ensuring that even if some Apache survived the cavalry, they would be torn apart by a civil war fought with American weapons. It was a plan for total extermination. Clara looked at Dakota. His face was carved from granite, his eyes burning with a cold, murderous rage. This was the ultimate betrayal from one of his own. This was the moment. They had the proof. They had the traitors cornered. Dakota drew his knife. Clara pulled the small Derringer pistol she had kept hidden in her boot, a gift from her father for protection. The irony was sickening, but as they prepared to move in, a new sound reached them, the thunder of hoofbeats, a lot of them, a cavalry patrol. But why would Davis have a patrol coming to their secret meeting? It didn't make sense. Unless it wasn't his patrol. Clara Ara's blood ran cold. Her father. He must have grown suspicious of Davis's constant disappearances. He must have followed him. Colonel Patterson and a dozen troopers reined in their horses at the mouth of the mine. "Lieutenant Davis!" The colonel's voice boomed, full of cold authority. "What is the meaning of this?" Inside the mine, there was a sudden, shocked silence. Then the scrape of boots on stone. Davis and Cale appeared at the entrance, their faces caught in the torchlight of the soldiers. A perfect tableau of treachery. Davis's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a mask of pure panic. "Colonel," Davis stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Thank God you're here. This is Cale, the Apache renegade. I was negotiating his surrender." It was a pathetic lie, and everyone knew it. Colonel Patterson's eyes narrowed, his gaze falling on the crate of brand-new repeating rifles at Cale's feet. "Negotiating with weapons, Lieutenant? That's a new tactic." "It's a trap!" Cale suddenly screamed, realizing the game was up. He made a desperate choice. He pointed a finger not at Davis, but at Colonel Patterson. "He is the traitor. He conspired with Dakota to kill us all." And with that, Cale and his warriors opened fire. The world exploded into chaos. The soldiers, caught by surprise, returned fire. The narrow entrance to the mine became a kill zone of ricocheting bullets and blinding muzzle flashes. Dakota pulled Clara Ara back into the shadows, shielding her with his body. This was a disaster. Her father was caught in a crossfire. Kyle was trying to salvage his own skin, and Davis was a cornered rat, about to do something desperate. In the confusion, Davis saw his chance. He wasn't looking at the fighting. He was looking at Clara Ara, hiding in the rocks. He raised his pistol. This was his last chance to silence the one person who knew the whole truth. But her father saw it. Even in the midst of the firefight, he saw his lieutenant aiming at his daughter. A look of horrified understanding dawned on his face. "Davis, no!" he bellowed. The colonel's shout distracted Davis for a fraction of a second. It was all Dakota needed. He launched himself from the shadows, a silent, deadly projectile. He slammed into Davis, and the two men went down in a tangle of limbs. Kyle, seeing his co-conspirator fall, made a break for it, trying to escape into the darkness. But Colonel Patterson was there, his face a mask of cold fury. He leveled his revolver and fired once. Cale dropped, the telegram fluttering from his dead hand. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. The remaining renegades surrendered. There was a sudden, ringing silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Dakota stood over Davis, his knife at the traitor's throat. Colonel Patterson walked forward, his eyes locked on his daughter. She stepped out from the shadows, the little derringer still clutched in her hand. For a long moment, father and daughter simply stared at each other across the carnage, the chasm of war and lies between them. "Clara," the colonel whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I thought he told me you were dead." "He lied," Clara said, her voice shaking. "He lied about everything." She pointed at Davis, who was trembling under Dakota's grip. "He's the traitor, father. He armed them. He started this whole war for a promotion." The colonel looked from his daughter's anguished face to the Apache war chief, holding a knife on his trusted officer, and then to the crate of rifles. The terrible, undeniable truth settled on him. He had been a fool. He had led his men into a massacre based on the lies of a monster. "Cease fire," Colonel Patterson said, his voice quiet but caring to every man. He then turned his gaze to the mountains, where the rest of his army was still hunting, still killing. "Sound the recall," he ordered the nearest soldier, his voice now a heartbroken roar. "Sound the recall now." The bugle call, the signal to retreat, echoed through the night, a lonely, mournful sound. The war was over, but the cost was staggering. As her father walked toward her, his arms outstretched, Clara finally let herself collapse, the strength that had carried her through the nightmare finally giving out. The battle was won, but the wounds she knew would last a lifetime. 6 months later, Clara stood on a ridge overlooking a new valley. A valley not of war, but of fragile, hard-won peace. The U.S. government, faced with the undeniable proof of Davis's treachery, had been forced to halt the campaign. Davis was court-martialed, his conspiracy laid bare for all to see. Colonel Patterson, though cleared of wrongdoing, retired his commission, the shame of his unwitting role in the massacre too great a burden to carry. He now lived in a small cabin nearby, a quiet, broken man trying to help his daughter build the new world she had fought for. The survivors of the Chiricahua, under Dakota's leadership, had been granted this fertile valley by treaty. It wasn't the vast wilderness they had once roamed, but it was theirs. And for the first time in generations, they were at peace. It was an uneasy peace, built on a foundation of graves and mistrust. But it was a start. Clara Ara, now Dakota's wife, had become the bridge between their two worlds. Her work as a liaison, her deep understanding of both cultures, was slowly, painstakingly helping to heal the wounds. Dakota came to stand beside her, his hand resting gently on the slight swell of her belly. Their child, a symbol of the future they were building, would be born into a world their parents had nearly destroyed. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly, his eyes on the sunset that painted the mountains in brilliant colors. "Losing the life you knew?" Clara smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "The life I knew was a lie," she said. "I found the truth out here, in this land, with your people, with you." Their love had not been a simple romance. It had been forged in fire, tested by betrayal, and had ultimately become the catalyst for change. It hadn't magically erased generations of hatred, but it had proven that understanding was possible, that one person's courage could expose a lie big enough to start a war. Their story became a quiet legend, a reminder that enemies are often just people you don't understand yet, and that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who wear a trusted uniform. The hidden stream where they first met still flowed, its water washing over the stones, carrying the whispers of a love that had, against all odds, changed the course of history. Did Clara Ara make the right choice, risking everything to follow her heart into enemy territory? Would you have had the courage to stand against your own people for what you believed was right? The easy path is to follow orders, to believe the stories you're told. The hard path is to seek the truth, no matter the cost. When faced with the choice between duty and love, between safety and justice, what would you choose? If this story of impossible love and incredible courage moved you, and if you believe that one voice can make a difference even in the darkest of times, then you're the kind of person we want in our community. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue to share tales that challenge us, inspire us, and prove that the human heart is the most powerful weapon of all. Because if a cavalry officer's daughter and an Apache war chief can stop a war, just imagine what we can accomplish together.